So, understanding no self is central to understanding nirvana. And now we have to look at the relationship between no self and Buddha nature. So, we're getting to the Buddha nature. So, you may have heard that Dogen taught all sentient beings are Buddha nature, as opposed to previous teaching which said all sentient beings have Buddha nature. So now I need to explain what Buddha nature is. So that's going to take a minute. This is why we're doing this now and not at the end of the last meeting. So historically there was this question about whether or not there were beings who were inherently incapable of awakening. Is there a being which is inherently incapable of awakening? And if that kind of being exists, then they're condemned to go around and around and around forever on this wheel of samsara and rebirth and Is there such a being? The Mahayana response is, well, the self is empty of any kind of fixed and permanent self nature. So this is the no self piece, right? So there is nothing that could be inherently capable or incapable of awakening. If the self is empty, then you can't make a distinction. So another response was something called the Tathagata doctrine, which says what beings had was the potential to become Buddha. Right? So this casts Buddha nature as a potential to become Buddha. So in China, people start thinking, well, this potential is called Buddha nature. Right? That led to two kind of related positions. So on the one hand, whatever happens is my karma. I'm resigned to it. There's nothing I can do. I did something, and now I'm feeling the result of that, and I can't escape from the result of that, and so I have no agency. There's nothing I can do. The other position is, well, whatever I do is already a manifestation of Buddha nature, so I can do whatever I want, right? There is nothing that isn't a manifestation of this Buddha nature, so regardless of rules, regardless of ethics, it doesn't matter what I do. And when I look at those two positions, I say, well, they come down to the same thing. We're trapped, right? We have no agency. So this is where Dogen's great doubt happens. Now, you might be familiar with Dogen's great doubt, because he says, if all beings have Buddha nature, why do we have to practice? What's the point of that? So, of course, he's originally ordained and practicing in the Chentai school in China. Chentai school taught this original enlightenment rather than acquired enlightenment. In other words, everyone already has Buddha nature. It is not something we acquire. And Dogen says, well then, if that's true, why are we killing ourselves to practice? Because practice is hard. Why are we doing this? And yet, he looks around and we all look around and say, well, there is suffering and delusion in the world and we need to make some effort. Clearly things are not optimal, right? Clearly things could be better. So, like, what's going on? So in the end, Dogen's conclusion is Buddha nature is not a thing. Here's another problem with language. This is another one of those things we can't actually put words around. Buddha nature is not a thing. It is not a state. It is not the potential for something. It's not an essence. It's not a soul. It's not power. It's not anything substantial. So Buddha nature is being, but it's not being like, well, there's being and non-being. Buddha nature is functioning. So a related teaching, if you want to go look somewhere about this, is the teachings about Jiju Yudzamai, this sort of universal functioning, right? So anything that exists is changing. We know from impermanence, is functioning, is moving. Being is not a static condition. There's no thing like being, and it's just rigid and inflexible and never changes. We know because of impermanence, being is in constant motion. So it can't be a thing, right? So Buddha nature is all beings or all dharmas simply doing what they do as a part of universal functioning. They're simply carrying out their function, living their lives, doing what they do, behaving the way they behave. So the ultimate truth is not some timeless principle called Buddha nature, right? It is what is actually going on around us every moment, right? So Buddha nature is not about what we create out of our perceptions, our processing minds, our ideas, our intellect about what could this thing be called Buddha nature. Dogen is careful to say Buddha nature is also not the self. It is not our consciousness. It is not some psychological element. There's nothing we can sort of pull out of our psyche and go, that's Buddha nature. It is not enlightenment or awakening. It is not anything that has a permanent essence, a soul. It's not anything we can sort of write a story about and then grab the story and say, well, that's Buddha nature. That's my idea about Buddha nature. It's non-substantial. So it's also not limited to the mind or the body or some result of Zazen, like I'm going to sit Zazen in order to get Buddhanature. That won't work, right? So we don't have or acquire Buddhanature for two reasons. One is it's already here, right? There's nothing to get. If Dogen says we already are Buddhanature, then there's nothing to get. There is no, I'm going to go out and acquire Buddhanature. The other reason is that from the point of view of emptiness, or the absolute, there is nothing separate called Buddhanature and no separate human being to acquire it. Now we're back to this thing about separation between someone doing something and the activity and the outcome, right? In the world of emptiness, that's not how things are. So there's no way that there's an I who can take some action to get something called Buddhanature, right? So any conception of Buddhanature as something, particularly something out there, this is the mark. So we can sort of now see this relationship between teachings about no self, about the self being empty, and teachings about Buddhanature. If you really want to dig into these things, they can become rather technical, but I invite you to do it. Dogen wrote an entire fascicle called Busho about Buddhanature. Toto-san gave, I think, 27 lectures on it over 3 Genzo-ways. It's one of the longest fascicles in the Shobo Genzo. So one of your study questions or your next steps questions in your handout is about go find Buddhanature, go find Busho, and read and study that piece. So it's a big topic for us, and it's not something we easily just sit down and go, oh, I'm going to look that up in the dictionary, right? So Callum, thank you for that question. I hope that was enough to get somebody started and at least begin to create that relationship in people's minds.